intelligence and national security reporter Ken Dilanian. Ken, let me start with you because I understand that NBC has some new reporting about one of those unnamed campaign officials in the Papadopoulos indictment.
That's right, Nicole. We're reporting that one of them was Paul Manafort himself, the campaign chairman at the time. And in the email, he suggests that the meeting that Papadopoulos was proposing with Putin should not go forward. And so that's exculpatory in that sense. But it also shows that what Sarah Sanders said during the White House press briefing today, which is that this is a low-level official and nobody at the campaign knew what he was doing, is not true. He was clearly coordinating with senior officials in the campaign. There's another person that he was in closer contact with who's identified in the documents as a campaign supervisor. And that person at one point said, "Good job," after Papadopoulos was explaining his efforts to have meetings with these Russians in pursuit of a further meeting in Moscow. And at another point, that person, that campaign supervisor, encouraged him to take an off-the-record meeting in Russia with these officials. So there's no doubt that people in senior positions in the Trump campaign knew that this guy was talking to Russians.
Ken, by the end of this special counsel investigation, our viewers will all have honorary legal degrees, but let's give them a little bit of help. Let's tell them, let me read the segment of the indictment that we're talking about. It says, quote, Papadopoulos emailed the high-ranking campaign official with the subject line, "New message from Russia." New message. I wonder if that is different from the old message. Quote, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs messaged and said that if Mr. Trump is unable to make it to Russia, if a campaign rep, me or someone else, can make it for a meeting, I am willing to make the trip. The campaign supervisor told the defendant, I would encourage you and another foreign policy advisor to the campaign to make the trip if it is feasible. So, Ken, let me ask you, is this an offer to collude and an acceptance of said offer to collude?
Well, I don't know that just proposing a meeting is an offer to collude. What I find more significant in these documents, actually, is this Papadopoulos' interaction with this professor who had ties to the Kremlin, who told him in April 2016 that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton and had thousands of emails. And as you know, Nicole, because we've been talking about this for months, the public was not told that the Russians had hacked the Democrats until June 2016. So the fact that this guy was shopping Russian possession of Democratic emails, to me, is deeply significant. And what intelligence experts have been saying all day is that this is classic. This is Russian intelligence trying to infiltrate the Trump campaign, plain and simple. The FBI documents don't say that explicitly, but that's what all the experts are telling us today, Nicole.
Jeremy Bash, you're one of those experts. Is that what the picture that's coming into sharper focus looks like to you?
Yeah, the documents in which Papadopoulos pleads guilty, and again, it is a conviction. This isn't a charge. This is a conviction, an admission of guilt by a former Trump campaign official for working with the Russians and lying to federal agents about it. It looks like a classic operation by the Russian intelligence services to spot, assess, and recruit and handle an operative inside the Trump campaign with whom they could have conversations, gather intelligence, and also feed information for their active measures campaigns.
And so why is there still an ongoing attempt at a messaging level from the president and his advisors to say that there was no contact with Russia? I mean, we now know there were multiple contacts. Jeff Sessions is recused because he either forgot about or, I believe, lied about his contact with Russians. Carter Page has admitted on this network to his meetings with Russians. You have another foreign policy aide now admitting to being in contact with Russians. Why is there a constant disinformation effort on this question of contact with Russians from the White House?
Because it looks so bad for them. And importantly, Nicole, the April meeting that Ken described, it was a breakfast meeting at a London hotel between the professor, who was obviously a Russian cutout handler, and Papadopoulos. So a cutout handler, like a spy recruiter? Yeah, it could be a staff officer of the Russian intelligence service, the SVR or the FSB. But more likely, I think it was not a staff officer. It was probably somebody they recruited to spot and assess individuals in Washington associated with the Trump campaign. And it's possible that this professor had this as part of his recurring responsibilities, what he got paid for by the Russians to do. But just to come back to the point, so at that breakfast meeting, he's offered emails, the dirt on Hillary Clinton, and at some point, those very same emails, that very same dirt was offered again, not just to low or mid-level Trump officials, but in fact to the highest echelons of the campaign at the June 2016 meeting, to Don Jr., to Jared Kushner, and to Paul Manafort himself. The Russians finally got what they wanted, which was a senior-level meeting with the Trump campaign, and they in effect offered to interfere in the election.
And Matt, we're talking now about the meeting in Trump Tower, right?
Yes.
With the Natalie Veselnitskaya, right? Did I get that?
Nailed it.
Okay, so see, I'm going to speak Russian by the end of this. Tie together you're right, it's not an indictment. He was arrested, Papadopoulos was arrested in July. He pled guilty and is now cooperating. So he's providing information in an ongoing manner. Is that the right way to describe what someone does? And his motive is leniency at sentencing. I think that was in the documents. What kind of information might he have about the ultimate meeting with the Russians, about the Don Jr. meeting in Trump Tower with the Russians?
So there's a very good clue in this, in the plea agreement. The meeting that Jeremy lays out with the London professor, where at that meeting, George Papadopoulos is offered dirt on Clinton and explained that the Russians have emails about Hillary Clinton. And remember, this is 1 month after John Podesta's emails are hacked. So this is real-time information that this professor is offering. He then, you have to presume, goes back and talks to other people in the campaign about what the offer he's gotten. The document does not speak to that at all. It talks about how he communicates with other officials about having further meetings, but it is, I think, intentionally silent about this offer for dirt. And I think it's intentionally silent because Bob Mueller is sending a signal to all of the other people on the campaign. I know exactly what happened. I know what George Papadopoulos did with that information. I know who he talked to. I know what they said to him. You now have an opportunity. You have one of two paths. You can take the path that Papadopoulos chose. You can cooperate with me and get a lenient sentence, as he's likely to get, or you can take the path that Paul Manafort and Rick Gates have chosen, and you can not cooperate. You can refuse to tell me the truth. You can lie in some instances, and I'm going to throw the book at you.
Eli, I worked in a White House that dealt with a special counsel investigation, and the most senior level person who was ensnared in that was Scooter Libby for perjury. And what Matt Miller just laid out was, there's now someone who knows exactly what went on, whose sentencing is incumbent upon continuing to tell the truth. So he's an unimpeachable witness, I would assume. Talk about what that does inside this West Wing.
I think it scares the hell out of some people, to be honest with you. And I mean, what Sarah Huckabee Sanders said today was just not believable. About this had nothing to do with the campaign, and that when she was asked the critical question, which is, the indictment says that campaign officials encouraged Papadopoulos to continue these conversations, to take these meetings, all she could say was, I'm not aware of those conversations, and move on. She was much less demonstrative and much less emphatic, saying, this is all nonsense, this is all. She couldn't answer that question, because that's the key question. And inside that White House, when the cameras are not on and when they're privately in their offices, they've been nervous for a long time. I think if it was just the Manafort and Gates indictment this morning, they maybe feel at least temporarily like they dodged a bullet. But you're exactly right. The Papadopoulos indictment changes the game. And this is a guy, he was arrested in July. So how long has he been having conversations with other people that Bob Mueller is aware of?
And in my conversations with them today, they said, yeah, I mean, I want to get to Manafort. But what they said about Manafort privately was, well, it was an open secret that he was shady, but people are trying to I mean, Ken Delaney has already reported out who one of those unnamed officials were. There's still a parlor game inside the White House trying to figure out who the other one is, because they obviously know that Bob Mueller now knows who that was. Can you talk about why Papadopoulos is so much more threatening to the rest of why he maybe creates more legal exposure to the rest of the campaign aides?
To the point that Eli just referenced, he was arrested at Dulles Airport on July 27th. He's been secretly cooperating since that time. He pled guilty in secret. Nobody even knew he stepped foot into a courtroom and before an Article 3 judge pled guilty. And since that time, obviously, he's been trying to work off his sentence, if you will. So two things, Nicole. Number one is they have a human source inside the Trump campaign apparatus. But more importantly, if you read the guilty plea, they have emails. They have every single one of his emails to every other Trump official. They have the entire Trump campaign's email trove, and they're going through it letter by letter.
So when did Donald Trump make up this story about the meeting that Don Jr. had? Were they already working with Papadopoulos? I mean, did Bob Mueller know at the time that Don Jr. told the first incorrect story that he ultimately walked back, that was a lie?
I got to go back through the timeline.
It was in
but yeah,
July.
I
It was
think so.
around July
Yeah.
4th that all unraveled. I think it was a week after July 4th that Don Jr. told his first cover story about the meeting in Trump Tower, said it was about adoption. If 2 weeks later they were working with Papadopoulos, they've obviously known for a very long time that everyone involved, I mean, it sort of puts into place some of the pieces. Like the list of people that Bob Mueller wants to talk to who were involved in crafting that false statement from Donald Trump that we now know was dictated by Donald Trump. Bob Mueller has known now for 3 months that was a lie because of what Papadopoulos could have testified.
That's right. And not only does he know it, but he can prove it. He now has a witness who can, at a trial or at a hearing, prove it.
And hey, Nicole, one thing about the rollout here, which I found fascinating, you know, the Papadopoulos documents came out about 90 minutes after the Manafort and Gates indictments. And that was intentional. You know, Mueller didn't have to release those today. He could have released them next week or 2 weeks from now. He did it today, and he did it 90 minutes after, when we were all digesting the Gates and Manafort charges, and when people from the White House were already starting to say, and Trump allies, this isn't about the campaign, this isn't about collusion. And then, boom, the Papadopoulos documents landed, and here was collusion.
Here was collusion, and here was Bob Mueller saying, you don't know what I know. And I know now from folks that I've talked to that everyone is now sort of re-racking their own tapes about their knowledge and their conversations about that Don Jr. meeting. That seems to be emerging, Ken Dilanian, as a central incident around which people may have perjured themselves.
Well, and also now we know that the campaign was already on notice that the Russians were peddling dirt. So when Don Jr. and it's even the same word, dirt. That word comes up now twice, right? In the context of both the Papadopoulos conversations and the Trump Tower meeting. So when Don Jr. got that email from the music promoter promising dirt on Hillary Clinton, the campaign already knew that the Russians were offering that, and it raises a whole set of other questions about what that meeting was really about.
Jeremy?
I was just going to ask Ken a quick question, if I might.
Go ahead.
Ken, just to understand your reporting a little bit, so are you saying that Papadopoulos went to Manafort and basically asked Manafort whether the campaign could have a direct meeting between Putin and Trump? Is that what you're reporting?
Well, this is actually from my colleague Julia Ainsley, and she's identified there's a particular email in the chain where Manafort says, we're not going to take this meeting between Trump and Putin. Trump is not going to meet with Putin during the campaign, and we want a low-level person to answer so as not to send a signal. So in that sense, it's exculpatory. It's Manafort saying, we're not going to meet with Putin. That's crazy. But it also shows that he was aware of Papadopoulos' efforts and interactions with these Russians.
I just want to say it may not be exculpatory. It may actually be incriminating because it shows they don't want to have an overt high-level meeting. They want to keep everything sub rosa and quiet.
Well, I would
Fair
add
enough.
to that, in the description of that email in the document, it does have Paul Manafort saying that, but then he also goes on to say in the email, have a low-level person send the signal so the Russians don't take it the wrong way, basically.
And I mean, I just started watching The Americans, but isn't that sort of how it goes? You send some low-level schlub out to do something so that, I mean, people knew what Paul Manafort looked like. I mean, that doesn't really suggest that you're not guilty of wanting to get dirt from the Russians, does it?
Yeah, no, I don't think it does at all. And
It
look,
just means you were willing to sacrifice a lower-level aid.
That's right. And don't forget, through all of this, it has been reported multiple times that Paul Manafort himself was picked up on U.S. intercepts talking to Russian intelligence officials or cutouts for Russian intelligence officials during the campaign. These are brand new contacts that we didn't know about today. There's still contacts that have been reported that we don't know the substance of that Bob Mueller knows about.
I want to talk, Eli, about Donald Trump's penchant for turning on people that he's known for decades. So I think the line coming out of the White House about Manafort is something like, oh, he wasn't there very long, and we didn't know him very well, and he came in, and then he left. He's been entangled with Paul Manafort either as a business associate or a tenant or someone who he knew and was familiar with for decades.
Manafort's on tape saying, I've known Donald Trump for decades. And even if they just knew each other during the campaign, I mean, the time that they were working together on this campaign from March through the late summer of 2016, Paul Manafort was effectively running this campaign through the Republican convention. There was the whole matter of changing the RNC platform to be more favorable, to strike the language that was favorable to Ukraine, something that was a pro-Russian move that raised some eyebrows. Manafort was running the show at that point. He was instrumental in the vice presidential selection process, and he was eventually fired because of bad press related to his business dealings in Ukraine and Russia. And so the campaign understood this was a public relations problem, but that doesn't exonerate them either. That shows some awareness that they knew at least some of Manafort's entanglements when he was on the campaign. They probably knew it when they brought him in as well.
Jeremy, I want you to talk about the two broader issues. This question of an investigation into whether or not obstruction of justice took place. These statements Ken Dilanian has already proven as false, something that Sarah Huckabee Sanders said from the podium today. How dangerous is it for these aides to now be making statements, knowing that there was someone from inside the campaign that has been cooperating with Special Counsel Bob Mueller since July?
Yeah, the Justice Department and prosecutors have a history of looking at what people say publicly about indictments, about plea deals, about convictions. And if you try to manipulate the public record about the truth, the Justice Department will basically think of that as an effort to obstruct justice and to lie. So to your point about the way the White House crafted that statement about the Don Jr. email, that goes directly to it. I do think it's important to say that the biggest issue in the Mueller investigation was not implicated by any of these revelations today, and that's the obstruction of justice matter about whether the president and his innermost aides, inner circle, fired Jim Comey with Russia on the brain, which of course we know the president has admitted doing. Whether that violated the law, we don't know, and we haven't gotten any indication from today's events.
And of course, he did that in an interview with our own Lester Holt. That's a good place to hit pause. We're going to pick up that part of the conversation on the other side of the break. Ken Dilanian, thank you for all of your awesome reporting today and every day, and thank you for spending the top of the hour with us.
Thank you,
when we
Nicole.
come back, did